You're listening to VerySpatial Podcast, episode 778, February 2nd, 2026.
Hello and welcome to a VerySpatial Podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb.
And this is Frank.
And this week we're going to be talking about things related to the news. But first, the news. We, of course, found out recently that Dr. Gladys West passed away at the age of 95. She, of course, is remembered mostly from her representation in the movie Hidden Figures. But for us, as the person who had a huge impact on do the calculations related to the geoid that is us, the Earth, you know, she had a huge impact on GPS and will continue to, of course, forever, because it was that base work in mathematics that she helped do that and did that allowed it to work and continue to work.
Yeah, it's very sad. I mean, she was 95, so it's amazing.
What's amazing to me is when you read through her biographies, and a lot of times coming out of like the local papers like Dinwiddie County, where she was born, she was very productive throughout her whole life in her research with GPS, global positioning systems, and geodesy, just contributing up to her biography. It began with a dream in 2020 and beyond.
I just muted everything so you could blow your nose, and then you didn't blow your nose. Most of this week is a theme, continuing on with the theme of GNSS. The Space Force has launched a GPS 3 SV09, and that was successfully launched on the 27th of January. And so that's another satellite on its way to the constellation for GPS. And of course, GPS 3 continued to build out, or continues to build out capabilities, making it a little more robust and resilient to things like jamming and such, but also adding those bands that are a little bit more commercial focused. So it's good to see that constellation continues to grow.
And SV09 is named in honor of Colonel Ellison Onizuka, a U.S. Air Force test pilot who was an astronaut that was aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger that, you know, from 1986, celebrating that anniversary.
Continuing with the Space Force / GNSS theme, Space Force has canceled their call for, work with various organizations to look at small sats as a way to put up low-cost support mechanisms to make a more resilient GPS system. So as opposed to having to spend the billions or hundreds of millions of dollars per satellite for each GPS satellite, this would have allowed for small sats to kind of be put into place to support and kind of, basically offset the issues if we were to begin to lose satellites or deal with some of the jamming issues that are becoming more common nowadays. So that has been canceled.
I mean, that's disappointing because, of course, we were just in the previous news item talking about the 9th launch in the GPS 3 series, but the number of GPS satellites it's a big constellation, and it's expensive to maintain, expensive to get them up there. And when you do have problems with them, there are backup satellites. So I think the current is 27 in the working constellation, but 31 satellites. So you do have some backup. But if the satellites go out of commission and you drop below a certain number, then you lose coverage. And so having the sort of a more nimble way to supplement and occasionally do have some signal issues, as we all know, having used GPS and other GNSs. So I think that's disappointing. Maybe they'll bring it back. Maybe it's just a partial thing. It's hard to say anymore what's going on with stuff. But
I think that I'm going to use the word dangerous to presume there's any rationality necessarily driving a lot of this right now. So I don't think there's a cohesive thought process or strategy. So that's probably why, who knows what the hell is going to happen.
I'm just saying that if a certain communications satellite small set array that recently announced itself as being an alternative to GPS suddenly gets another contract,
you wouldn't be shocked?
Be the resilient aspect.
Yes.
No.
Yes. So
given that they put in a request to launch 1 million satellites, I think, over the next, don't even remember how long it's going to be. So yeah, we'll see how that plays out with those two things kind of coming out at the same time. And to round up the GNSS/location aspect of these news items, before we move on to one that's not, TikTok, which is now bifurcated into TikTok and TikTok US. TikTok US terms of service include detailed location data for users. This, of course, is something that it should and has traditionally been an opt-in option. It wasn't something necessarily being stored and saved. Of course, it would be attached to the media whenever it got uploaded. In certain cases, there's a lot of questions, I think, around what's going to happen with TikTok US given its terms of service. But there's so many people who are addicted at this point who wouldn't want to leave the platform. I don't think it's going to have a notable impact.
I can't say that those sort of things added to any of the other social media seem to have hampered it in any meaningful way. The thing that always concerns me, particularly with the kids, meaning the students I interact with, is how many are just utterly, they just don't realize that what they're agreeing to do.
I mean, none of us read the terms of service. Let's be fair.
No, but in the indifference to say, which I guess, this, we can touch a bit of this on the topic, but still, it is something, even if you don't want to read the whole terms of service, because there's a whole bunch of junk in there that nobody cares about, just be aware. You could probably find a summary somewhere.
Yes, somebody has read it.
And posted it on Reddit. Sorry. I am so sorry.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. I didn't post it because I have to verify it, but I thought I saw a news story where someone did read all the terms of service for one of the mobile apps, and they were able to get a free vacation out of it or something. So I need to verify that, but it was written in small print for someone that had read everything.
I think I got a settlement or something. Anyway, it's one of those stories.
And finally,
so Google Labs, and I'm not sure where this debuted, but Google has released a preview and a little test demo for Project Genie. And so for all of us who work in 3D modeling, I guess even game development, all kinds of things, right? At first, this seems pretty amazing. On the downside, you can't really play with it because I don't remember as many tools being like this, but maybe this is just a sign of the times. If you even want to play with Project Genie, so what it does is you put in a prompt and it generates a world that you can navigate around it. So it's already got the camera navigation, it'll generate the models, you can move around. And then this is just from previews because if you want to try it, it's $125 US to try it.
Okay, so you have to have Google's AI Ultra subscription tier, which Sue is pointing out is $120. $125 for the first 3 months. It is $50 a month subscription platform tier if you're interested. So even if you have Pro Plus, you don't get access to Project Genie currently, at least, as it's in its early beta stage, I guess.
Yes, and there are some demo videos, and even if you get it right now, you can create little videos, but it essentially uses AI prompts, and you can use images as well to generate these worlds that you can navigate around in. And so for those of us in the world building sort of area, on the one hand, it's pretty amazing that we're there, but it's a little bit hard to kind of gauge the where they're going with the tools since it's restricted.
So let's be honest, it's going to be Google's latest amazing thing gets canceled in no time at all.
Well, it depends.
They've got a history.
Yeah, but I mean, it hasn't been released broadly other than to Ultra subscribers. And again, it's one of those where it probably is eating up a lot of tokens to do that. So I guess I kind of get that, but to announce it and then not even give an easy access to do one trial.
Yeah, that's the weird part.
And then the second thing is that this is going to end up making a whole lot of, I think it's going to end up making a whole lot of worlds that the game's going to be spot the weird thing that you just go, okay, but that's not how mailboxes work or whatever, it's going to be something in there that you just go, no, that's just like a dream or something, version.
I mean, I will point out that it isn't creating the game. It is just creating the world. So yes, you get the camera, you get the character, you get the world, but it doesn't, anything I've seen on it so far has not given any story elements, anything like that. It's just, here it is, you can wander through it type of situation. I'm sure it'll grow in time. And of course, the fact if you can pull this into Unreal or Unity or whatever your preferred engine is, Godot, then yeah, you can probably begin to put those elements in yourself by building on this model. But yeah, right now it's just the model.
Yeah. And there's no way to, I mean, like in the early preview, you can't export or anything. You can just, I guess, create a
we don't
movie
know.
of it.
We don't know.
So it's hard to tell what the end game is.
Yeah, looking at the gallery, it's sort of like Street View, but for a world builder. You can be in the Amazon, aviator, you're a parrot, exploring the canopy of a rainforest. It doesn't say where, and I can't really tell how accurate it is. And you can be a paper plane flying over a waterfall, and then even a small little clay ladybug, it looks like, going through your world. So it looks really good. It's just like you said, a cat on a vacuum. Can't really tell what it is yet.
And so that's it for the news.
And onto the web corner, there is a site that I really like to get their newsletters from, because it is City as a Living Laboratory. It is a project that's been around since 2013, working with cities like New York City and Milwaukee to really bring together the spatial community, artists, scientists, and do some ground level work in a city. And it's generated things like handwritten, hand-drawn maps, even map tattoos of, the rivers. And so it's still open for any cities or anyone working in an area where they want to get involved. I just like to look at it for some inspiration and some of the projects and material that they make available for other urban areas to use.
Okay, so this week, given the preponderance of GNSS related items in our news, might as well just talk about location-based services, right? Where we are, kind of the state of things, where we think we're going in the near future, maybe. It's probably going to be a shorter conversation, but just one to come back around to after a little while. And we spent so much time saying this year will be the year of location-based services whenever we were first starting. And now they're just so integrated into our daily lives that, it's a very stark difference for us, for people less aged than us. It is just the norm, right? It's where we are. It's what you've always known. For anybody who's under the age of, 30, it's just kind of been there.
I haven't even go as far as to say almost 40. I mean,
they would have been 20 whenever these things started to really push their way out. So yeah, that's fair.
I mean, they're just so ubiquitous now and the interesting thing to me is that we don't call them location-based services for the most part. I mean, in the popular vernacular, but knowing where you're at and what's around you is just part of the technology, and no matter what you're using. It's a little weird when you have an app that doesn't use location-based services sometimes. It's just like, it's just weird that it's so ubiquitous. And there's some funny things I read, funny to me, on subreddits at various points talking about, why are you telling me directions? Or asking, why did people really stop and ask directions on how to get to this place or that place? Like it was the weirdest, most arcane thing these people had ever heard. Why don't you just use the GPS? And that was a little bit just like, my God, that's a wholly different way of thinking. Because I got very good at giving directions when people would stop me. Hey, where's the post office or whatever? I go, okay, this is exactly what you want to do. And that's just a skill that most people, I say kids, but most people don't have anymore because you just don't need it for the most part.
What's interesting to me is the explosion of location-based services, like Frank said, not labeled that way outside the spatial community. As an industry, where the innovation isn't in the location basedness of the app itself or the tool itself, but in actually what people can do with that, basically selling that information or gathering that information, but then not in the way that we normally think of it as an analysis or being able to do something or make a decision based on it. That it's almost the product itself as that collection. But I don't think we could get there without the accuracy that we have now. So I think we've almost got two different, location-based service worlds. One in which we're doing the functionality, and then the other one, which is the people as the product.
Does anyone else think it's weird that like the last, I don't know how many iPhones, it doesn't seem like they're doing anything about the location accuracy. They don't really talk about it. I'm talking about the hardware side of things, not necessarily on, making Apple Maps better or something like that.
Maybe that's a function of growing into the system, right? That the bulk of the users, those of us at the beginning who knew that there was a way to make it better, right? Because I remember back, so this is the thing, back when I first started using GPS, right? It, like with the handheld receivers you could get access to, and even the military base, because I think I've said before on the podcast, I spent some time doing surveys on a military base as a civilian contractor, but we had access to the handheld devices. So even those on a given day could be woefully inaccurate. And we just kind of adapted to it. And that's even like in the specialized space. But as these became more ubiquitous, I guess the trade-off is for when it's usually right versus, well, all right, we still have some mistakes. And now it's just one of those things that you deal with and move on unless you get a sensational case, right, of somebody followed their GPS into the lake, right, kind of thing. So, I mean, I just wonder if our tolerance has just increased, and so we don't point it out as much.
What prompted me this is that I often, when I'm giving lectures, talk about accuracy and how it matters. And we have a surveying program on our campus, and so sometimes you're talking to surveyors, and you say, okay, well, you pick out your phone and you say, well, this thing is accurate too. And I usually stick my arms out in either direction and go, it's about that accurate. And, that matters that's perfectly fine for most people in most cases. If you're trying to figure out how to get into a parking lot of, a store or something like that, that's perfectly accurate. But if you're trying to figure out where a gas line is, that's not nearly accurate enough. That's, my spiel in classes. And I realized the other day, I was like, I'm throwing my arms out, and I've been doing the exact same demo for 10 years. And I realized, you know what? Is that accurate? And I went and looked it up, and I was like, oh, well, actually, that's still about as accurate as iPhone-ish yet. I don't know about Android. And I realized it's kind of odd. That's just not a thing that we even think about the tech. I have to imagine there are GPS chips that are more accurate that would fit inside of an iPhone. And Apple just went, it's fine.
So, okay.
We'd rather focus on something else.
Let's talk about the technologies then for just a second to just give a base layer of what we're talking about. We're talking about GNSS. Today, our mobile devices, this is Android, iPhone, whatever you're using, generally comes with a multi-spectrum chip. So it'll grab your data for your GPS, your GNSS, GPS, GLONASS, Beta Owl, Galileo, I think all of those, and then regional ones as well. You can look at your phone to see which regions it does. So you can get accuracy on that level. The issue, of course, is that whenever you're even in the middle of a field, no cell phone connection in terms of your 5G or 4G, whatever, you're still dealing with the inaccuracies caused by the atmosphere. And so that's where we get 20 meters or so off, right? Then we have wide area augmentation systems that have been set up that were made for flights. They're made to basically make sure that planes have a close enough signal. So it's basically a terrestrial base giving a correction signal, so a differential GPS signal, essentially, to all these devices. And it's wide area, it's broadcasting all the time. And so your device then can take advantage of that, and that gets you down to the arm's length, so 2 meters to 4 meters-ish type of situation. So we have our GNSS, we have our wide area augmentation system, which is a differential GPS or differential GNSS system. And then, of course, we have our professional differential GNSS systems that we can pay money to get access to. Every state, most countries have access to a signal where they're feeding differential from base stations they have set up in regions in their state, so you can get better accuracy. That takes us down from 2 to 4 meters down to sub-foot usually, depending on where you are. But most people aren't going to be using that because it's not commercial off the shelf. And so it's really that 2 to 4 meters where we get to. And so, yeah, why isn't Apple or someone else working with the states to get access to that? Because they could, for very little money, they could probably talk the states into giving them access to that better resolution differential data and get us much closer. But at the same time, do they need to? Because with our GPS on our phones, we're also working with the cell phone triangulation besides our trilateration for GNSS, so that we get both of those, and that gives us a lot more accuracy than we get with GPS by itself. So it gets us those last, meter and a half accuracy, and helps us whenever we're inside buildings where even the differential GPS systems can't help us whenever we're inside buildings. Okay, that's the technical background. Keep going.
Right. So the thing that's kind of interesting to me is that we've kind of decided culturally, I guess, that level of accuracy is perfectly fine for almost all situations. So don't worry about it. That's all we really need to have. So I don't know this. I've never done the research to figure out what the actual data shows, but I would bet at least 70%, maybe more, of the location-based services within a phone are used for either navigation or to geotag a photo or video. And I would say maybe even higher, maybe 80% or 90%. I mean, that's the overwhelming use cases, I think, for location-based services for most people most of the time, in which case, throw your arms out in either direction, and that's accurate enough for almost all those scenarios. So you kind of get why they have it, but it is kind of odd that since, what precipitated this conversation a bit was, hey, this was something that was, it's coming, it's important for so many years. And then we kind of peaked real quick. And then it's like, okay, this is good. And now it's about data, not about the technical signal piece.
Well, I mean, you have the location, right? The location accuracy isn't getting better, but the services that are taking advantage of it are getting better, I think would be my counterpoint. And so that's not really an OS/hardware based issue. That's whoever's utilizing and sharing the data or collecting the data. And again, it's become so transparent. We don't necessarily think about the fact that a lot of the apps that we download every day are location-based service oriented apps.
Yeah, I think that all the developments on the data side, like I said.
Yeah, and I think that's it, right? Because short of the use cases you gave, right, if I'm navigating down a trail and it's really important that I have super accuracy, if I'm navigating to Taco Bell or whatever, right, it's a fixed location, and if I get close enough, I'm going to see it. And so I think that's it, right? And we're now so used to everything wanting to give us that information, by the way, to improve it, that those of us who use the phones don't necessarily even notice any kind of, variance in the accuracy when it's enough to do the things that are largely the services. So now geofencing and behind the scenes and stuff like that is a different story, but I think that's one that still, I don't think took off, at least, and I'm not in this area much, but it doesn't seem like that took off quite as much. So the sort of scenario where you're on foot and you cross into a geofencing zone and get some information. So that collision might matter a little bit more in terms of where it's occurring in the hidden boundary. But
so I pulled my phone out of my pocket, and I would say that on any page that I'm flipping through on my phone of apps, only about 20% of them, and maybe less, don't use or can't use my location. Some of them don't need it.
I was going to say, you sure they're not getting it anyway?
But most of them still can use it. So, for instance, whenever I first pulled it up, I had my smart home stuff up, and none of those explicitly need my location, but they'll use my location to say whether I'm home or not, and that'll have an impact on whether certain things turn off and on or not, knowing where my house is so that it knows when sunset is, those type of things. Things you don't really think about in terms of location-based services that still are using your location. So yeah, I think it's the data, whether it's data that we're providing or data that we're utilizing, like Frank's saying, is, where we are now with those services.
You remember when we would go to the UC and we'd interview all those companies and they would talk about how they're getting that better and making that better and, integrating with this and uploading to that and this company's buying that company and all that sort of stuff like that about the data space. And I feel like even for in the know people like we are supposed to be, that has gotten real quiet. Like it's just silently kind of happening on the back end. It feels a little bit like, maybe this is a bad analogy because you can see that pretty easily, but it feels a little bit like, I don't know, roadworks or something that just kind of happens in the background a bit, automatically. Less than this is a celebrated thing. And so we're constantly making it better and better. I mean, Apple Maps, they had a big announcement a year or two ago with a big thing they were doing, right? But they've been kind of quiet lately on what they're doing. They're just making it better and better. And they are probably the most famous of the big players to have data issues starting off. That obviously that's been fixed, but I think they're being very vocal because they had to be vocal because they had so many issues starting out of the gate. But even now it's kind of quiet. It happens, but I bet if you look at the iOS notes for anything but like a bug fix, something's going on with Apple Maps, but it's just like, oh yeah, Apple Maps, that thing better.
I think this comes around to a few different things, but one of them I'll point out that Bill Dollins recently wrote over on his GeoMusings blog, PostGIS Revisited, and maybe that's a topic that we need to just kind of deep dive into what he talks about in that. But it is, and again, this he talked about the first time he talked about PostGIS, and then is even more true now, kind of the demonolithicing of GIS. I mean, we still have the monoliths, the ArcGIS, QGIS, those type of things, but there's a lot more of the use code tools to do a very specific thing. We're seeing a lot more of that at this point than maybe we did maybe 20 years ago whenever we were first starting. There was still some of it going on, but now there's just more use cases for doing that than maybe there was whenever it was mostly laptop, desktop. And so maybe that is why we're not hearing about it as much, is because it's so decentralized that we don't hear about what each company is doing to have these impacts on location-based services. And again, sometimes it just comes down to a line of code that somebody shared on GitHub that suddenly everybody's using whenever they're building their new tools.
And Jesse, to that point, I think sometimes with that decentralization, it's not just that you can't make a broader splash because of, it's no longer in that those big situations, but also that the people doing it themselves might not realize how significant what they're doing is. It's not just they don't have a voice to say it to, it's they themselves might not realize what a big deal they've made in the world, going back to the early days of Gladys West and Geodesy.
Okay, so broad ideas. Didn't really talk in advance to coordinate, but I think that gives you some ideas of where we are in terms of our thoughts on GNSS, location-based services, those type of things between the news items and this. And it's, continuing to change. And, going back to our other news item of the question of resilience, it's not just about the location resilience, it's the PNT resilience that we are looking for as well. And it's not just the US with GPS that's doing this. So we do have other countries who are working on these issues and implementing strategies to make these things more resilient. So since many of our devices can access multiple GNS systems, it will make our own use cases more resilient as well. So,
and I think the fact that we don't hear stuff is, we kept saying, well, it's going to arrive. It kind of arrived like, the water sort of oozed in, and LBS and all of these things are now just so embedded in our mobile world that it just didn't arrive with a bang. And for me, right, the short amount of time, I still have a slide in my discussion of this for my introductory students that shows a graphic of the LBS sort of chain, and the device in there is BlackBerry in the picture. And there's also a Microsoft Zune, right? And so it goes back to an era when people were trying to figure these things out, and everybody wanted to be the first one to say, can you connect these things? And I have to tell them what a card catalog is. I have to tell them what these devices were, and that for a brief moment in time, right, these were the things that people were trying to do with these, services and collections and the devices that they tried to make to leverage them. And
leave it to a person with a BA and master's in history to feel like they need to explain why BlackBerry was important to GNSS.
I think so. I think that always should appreciate where it came from.
Do you think they actually do in your 2 minutes of talking about it?
I think it's funny. They actually, thanks to Guardians of the Galaxy, some of them know what a Zune is. And so there you go.
Well, that is harking back to a professor we all know. He's retired now, he's emeritus, but Dr. Greg Elms, in his intro to GIS class, used to spend time talking about what is binary, how it works, and all that sort of stuff, because he felt, I think correctly, that most students didn't really have the background of how a computer actually does computer stuff. And every time that would go over, you'd hear students complaining, why do I even need to know this? This is not relevant to anything. So,
except for the way that the computer works.
Yeah. Well,
and I feel like this is an opportunity. It goes on YouTube. The Geodesy community is putting out calls for people to get into the field, and everything we've been talking about shows that, even though it's been happening quietly, there still is a need for this type of deep research going on. So, to say, if you're interested in any of these topics, to think about it as a field of study.
Well, and not even necessarily research. If it's something you're interested in, surveying is still needed. And I think people see it less because there's so many technologies in their life that are doing some of those things. But as someone who worked in North Carolina until just a couple of years ago, it's a very clear distinction in some states about what people who are doing GIS can do and what people with surveying license can do. And to be fair, legally, that's true everywhere. But even some of the traditional GIS type of things are limited for GIS people to do because they're seen by certain legislation to be things that are surveyor projects. So
that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
Well, it's just if you can geodesy, you can do both. So places like North Carolina A&T, why am I not going to remember anywhere else in the country? Oh, well, you can go to and get into those type of
State, I think, or Oregon, one of those two had the model law that went into effect. It's like 10 years ago now.
Yeah. But I was trying to think of universities that have geodesy / whatever you want to call them. What is it?
Are you thinking of geomatics?
Thank you. Geomatics programs. Or go to your local community college and get your surveying classes, do an internship, and get into your PLS if you need it.
I tell you what, we got exposed to some really interesting data that we're trying to purchase at my institution, and it's about programs, meaning academic programs, and their demand. And I was very shocked to find that they had basically run, as a preliminary report, they had run all of our programs through, and they showed basically the demand compared to the competitiveness. In other words, how many programs are doing that. And I was shocked at the demand for surveying. It was like 98% out of a score of 100. It was like, we need this. This is important.
Yeah.
So more places need to be doing it.
Yeah.
And I'd say I was shocked at somebody who thought this is important, but even I was shocked at how high that number was.
And that's it for the topic. Okay, on to the events corner. As always, check out these events, most of which are in other countries this time around.
The 2026 International Conference on Geography and Travel, ICGT, is taking place April 1st in Pune, India.
The Geographical Association Conference will be April 8th through the 10th in Sheffield in the UK.
The European Geosciences Union General Assembly will be November 3rd through the 8th in Vienna, Austria, and online.
Nordic Geographers meeting is taking place June 22nd to the 25th in Reykjavik, Iceland.
Of course, if you'd like us to add your event to the podcast, send us an email to podcast@veryspatial.com.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
I can be reached at barb@veryspatial.com.
You can reach me at frank@veryspatial.com.
And I'm available at Kind of Spatial. You can find all of our contact information over at veryspatial.com/contacts.
As always,
We're the folks in Very Spatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Am I walking or drowning or finding my reason for life? 'Cause I don't feel like I'm changing, but something's repeating all the. Oh, if I could take a break, find white waters and rivers and love, then maybe I could get away. I'm captive in my habits of thought. Yeah, I try to do meaning, but sometimes I think it's not there. I know I bled through your veins, just trying to split the burden I bear. Oh, if I could take a break, find white waters and rivers and love, then maybe I could get away. 'Cause I'm captive in my habits of thought. But if this is all, I won't say anything for anyone I won't. God only knows if it's sat at the table awaiting my mother's call. Oh, throw out my phone for the reasons I am trying to let this go. Oh God, I used to know how to say anything to anyone I know. She's free falling, and I'm going backwards again. And I know it's important, but I got mirrors reflecting the past in my head. So if I go, would you tell me to come close, 'cause in this ship, the water's been getting in. But if this is all, I won't say anything for anyone I won't. God only knows if it's sat at the table awaiting my mother's call. Oh, throw out my phone for the reasons I am trying to let this go. Oh God.